Good morning, hello, and welcome. I hope there's some people there listening to me. I can't see anyone, but hello and welcome to this briefing of Cambridge City Council and South Cambs District Council, a briefing regarding build-to-rent clustering and affordable rent. It's 10:33. I do apologise if there's some of you who've been waiting some time to join. There was some miscommunication in our invitation, so I do apologise for that. My name is Julian Adams. I'm a Growth Projects Officer with Cambridge City Council, and today we have a briefing regarding those three policies, we hope we will give you enough information to inform your response to consultation that we have at present. Just a little bit of background. We have the Greater Cambridge Housing Strategy 2019 to 2023, which I hope some of you are all familiar with. But that provides the vision for housing that meets the housing need for Greater Cambridge, which is South Cambs District Council and Cambridge City Council. The three policies that we're discussing today, we hope to have appended to that strategy and adopted as material consideration for development applications in our area. They've been developed over the past year or so in response to changing needs and trends in the housing market, and are currently out for public consultation until the 23rd of this month. We don't intend to use the time today for discussion or debate really about the policies, but more to give you context and clarification that will help inform your response to the consultation. So we've got up until noon today. I don't anticipate that it'll take that long. We've got three presentations, about 10 minutes each, during which if you do have points of clarification or queries, please put them in the Q&A section. I shall then take them at the end of the presentation and put them to the presenter to get some answers and relay them that way. We are being recorded, so if you have any issues, please raise a hand regarding that. And the council has experienced a few difficulties regarding Zoom over the last couple of weeks. We're not anticipating any today, but fingers crossed we'll go okay without any technical glitches. It's probably going to be me actually if there is a technical glitch, since I'm not particularly good at this. But anyway, let's crack on and invite our first presentation, which concerns build to rent, and it's Helen Reid.
Hello, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about our proposed policy on build to rent, and as most of you know, build to rent has been recognised as a distinct asset class within the private rented sector in the National Planning Policy Framework. It's essentially defined as purpose-built housing, which is typically fully rented out. It can be flats or houses, can form part of a wider tenure development, but should be on the same site or contiguous with the main development. Build to rent usually offers tenancy agreements of 3 years or more, and is typically professionally managed stock in single ownership and control. There's further national guidance, which I'm sure you'll be aware of, which goes into a bit more detail on things like expectations that schemes will provide an element of affordable housing, which is usually affordable private rent, but could also be through other means. And 20% is given as the benchmark proportion of the scheme as a whole. The guidance also says that affordable private rent levels should be at least 20% below market rents, inclusive of service charges, and it talks about arrangements covering the potential scenario of units or schemes being decommissioned at some time in the future. So could I have the next slide, please? Excuse me, sorry, my reference is frozen. So our go back. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties here as well. Right. So our draft policy is shaped around the National Planning Policy Framework and National Planning Guidance. The Council's local plans don't currently include a policy on build to rent specifically, but there are other elements of the local plan which are relevant to the policy around issues such as design and affordable housing provision. The policy also aims to help meet some of the Council's broader corporate objectives and the vision and objectives in our Greater Cambridge housing strategy. And it takes into account a range of evidence available on the housing market and relevant research. So why are we introducing a policy? Sorry, that's the next slide, please. Yeah. Well, our housing strategy recognises the role that new build private rented sector housing has in helping to meet housing needs. As we've already said, build to rent is an up and coming tenure, and there appears to be increasing interest from investors and developers bringing forward build to rent schemes locally. Although it's not part of the local plan, the policy will be a material consideration in dealing with planning applications and will help to inform what goes into the new joint local plan that we're currently working on. Both councils recognise many of the benefits that new build to rent schemes may bring in terms of accelerating housing delivery on larger sites and in offering more choice for those who want or need to rent. But we also have some concerns that there could be some unintended consequences of bringing forward new schemes. And our policy aims to sort of address some of those potential risks that we've identified, and I'll talk a bit more about those later. Next slide, please. So our policy is designed to cover build to rent schemes which provide good quality homes designed and built specifically and entirely for rent, although of course this is separate from social affordable rent housing provided for people on the housing register. There'd need to be a covenant in place for a minimum of 15 years, although preferably longer, for which reasons of which I'll touch on later. Tenants should be offered tenancies of 3 years or more if they want them. Schemes need to be in professional management and single ownership and control, and we expect there to be an appropriate provision of affordable housing. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that we're aiming to try to maximise the benefits of build to rent, but also minimising any risks that might arise. So this slide starts to talk about some of the issues we want the policy to address. Housing affordability, as you know, is a major issue in Cambridge, and it goes without saying it will be important both to yourselves and to the councils that schemes provide a housing option that's affordable to those who want to live there. And that's really mainly in relation to the affordable private rent homes, but of course it's also relevant to the market homes as well. Provision of affordable housing is a high priority for both councils. As you know, our local plans require 40% affordable housing on larger sites. And although we do understand that viability considerations are different on build to rent schemes, and with national guidance pitching only 20% as a benchmark for affordable housing, we do need to ensure that as much affordable provision is brought forward as possible within those constraints. Community and place shaping are really important to us, particularly on large scale new developments, and our policy aims to address some of the risks which we think could arise potentially in relation to large schemes coming forward at early stages of development, with perhaps where there's limited broader community facilities in place at that point. We want to minimise the community risks around potential tenancy churn if people only want to stay short term, and we want communities to be well mixed. It's also important to us, as no doubt it is to you, that schemes are well managed to help prevent any negative impacts internally and on the wider community. And we want to ensure plans are in place should schemes be decommissioned further down the line, again to minimise any negative impacts on the wider community. Next slide, please. So this is a quick summary of what the draft policy includes. Firstly, we'd expect to see up-to-date evidence of need in relation to any schemes which come forward. This includes information on levels of need and on the profile of residents assessed as likely to be in the main target groups. In terms of the schemes themselves, in order to meet our objectives around mixed balance and sustainable communities, we'd want to see a mix of property sizes to meet a range of needs. As I said, we're aware of long-term viability issues coming into play in relation to size of schemes, but in view of some of the potential risks we touched on earlier, which we think could potentially be exacerbated in very large schemes, we may in some cases seek to limit the size of schemes in some circumstances, if that's necessary to meet our wider objectives. And for the same reasons, we may also in certain circumstances want to see build to rent distributed more widely across larger sites rather than all together in one place. Quality is important, and we would expect schemes to be delivered in line with our broader planning policy objectives in terms of issues such as design quality, sustainability and space standards. And we'd be looking for an appropriate element of shared space that's to help promote social interaction and support things like studying and working from home. Next slide, please. As well as requirements around the development itself, we'd expect, as guidance suggests, schemes to be under single management and to provide an appropriate level of on-site management as well. And we've already talked about the minimum 3-year tenancy requirement. Tenants should also be able to end their tenancies with appropriate notice. Homelessness is a big issue in Cambridge, and we'd want to minimise the risk of people becoming homeless with clear arrangements in place for tenants to receive any support they might need. And as stated previously, we'd expect a covenant to be in place. And although we specified a minimum 15 years, there may be circumstances, 15 years, there may be circumstances where we would be looking to negotiate a longer period. For example, on sites where the overall build out might take some years to be completed. And we would be looking for clawback arrangements to be agreed in the Section 106, both in relation to decommissioning of market homes during the covenant period and to any future decommissioning of the affordable housing. Next, please. As regards affordable housing, as the guidance says, this would need to be in perpetuity. I can never say that word. And we're seeking a minimum of 20% affordable housing. We've said that more if it's achievable on 10 sites of 10 homes or more. And we do normally expect the affordable to be on site, but there may be cases where it's beneficial to have an alternative form of contribution, either financial or in the form of alternative affordable housing elsewhere. Excuse me. Affordable housing should be tenure blind and distributed across the scheme, and rents should be set at least 20% below market rents and affordable to those who need them. And in setting rents, regard should be had to our affordable rents policy, which we're also consulting on in relation to social housing rent levels, and Julie will be talking a bit about that later. Tenants shouldn't have any nasty surprises in relation to sudden expected rent increases, and we expect rent reviews to be aligned with reviews carried out on the market homes. And the councils want to have some say on issues such as eligibility for affordable private rented homes, rental affordability, marketing and things like that. We'd also expect arrangements to be in place for monitoring the use of affordable private rent units to give assurance they're being let properly and meeting the desired objectives. And we'd expect clawback mechanisms to be in place in schemes or units which were decommissioned sometime down the line. Next, please. So around viability, as I've said, we recognise that viability is different for market sale homes, but as you will be aware, provision of affordable housing is a high priority for councils, and we are concerned, as I think I said earlier, about build to rent providing less than 40% affordable, which is usually required through our local plans. And this is a particular concern on larger sites, which will be providing both build to rent and other forms of housing. So on those larger sites, we will be seeking to achieve 40% across the whole site, with the build to rent affordable housing contributing towards that 40%. We also recognise that in some cases there may need to be a trade-off between some elements of policy, as with any scheme, and that would of course require a negotiation to ensure that build to rent schemes can best meet the council's objectives. So hopefully that's not too much of a surprise if you've been through the policy already. Thank you for listening. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat, as Julian said, and we'll hand you over to Tracy shortly once we've dealt with those. Who'll be talking about clustering and distribution of affordable housing.
Thank you, Helen. That's great. I see at the moment we're flooded with questions and queries. We've got none at present. I'll talk very slowly, just in case people are typing and some pop in. We are going to move on to clustering unless we have any of those come through. Well, we've plenty of time. We can pick them up at the end if people think of them as we go along. Okay, let's move on to the next subject then. And Tracy Harrison is going to talk to us about clustering. Tracy.
Good morning. My name is Tracy Harrison. I'm the Joint Housing Development Officer working with both South Cambs and Cambridge City strategic teams. The first slide shows our current position regarding clustering. Firstly, Cambridge City. These are the key points from the existing affordable housing SPD. the layout, grouping, flatted schemes and location being the principal factors. Second slide, please. Moving on to South Cambs, very similar recommendations exist, although South Cambs refer to rural village developments having smaller clusters of 6 to 8 units. Again, layout, grouping, flatted schemes and locations are key elements to consider. The current recommendations work for us all, mainly on smaller sites, parcels of 60 units or less. Third slide, please. Since the SPDs were adopted in 2008-2010, respectively, growth sites in the Greater Cambridge area have moved on rapidly. Large sites of 3,000 to 10,000 units are creating larger parcels of 200 units or more. Issues are starting to arise where large parcels are coming forward and the affordable needs to be in larger clusters, often at the maximum recommendation of 25 units. We're also finding clusters are located close to each other, often abutting. In the future, it's expected we'll start to see high density sites come forward, North East Cambridge, for example. And these high density sites will be providing blocks of flats in excess of 4 floors, which may cause issues with our current policy. That should only be 12 flats off a common stairwell, and indeed may also require mixed tenures to share the stairwells. Fourth slide, please. Last year, I sent out a short survey asking registered providers who work in the Greater Cambridgeshire area if they have any issues with their current clustering distribution recommendations. And these are some of the issues that the providers say they are facing. Antisocial behaviour neighbour disputes often arise because similar types of housing are grouped together. Often we find that high numbers of 3 or 4 beds are placed together, and this creates high child density areas. The children can be of similar ages when the properties are initially let, and ultimately this can cause problems for many years to come, especially if there are large numbers of teenagers living in one area. The providers prefer a mix of units, and this will also help if someone wants to downsize later when the children leave home. Hopefully they can move to a smaller home, but remain living in the same street or locality with people they know. Providers have said they don't like pepper potting particularly, as this usually entails placing 1 or 2 homes with market homes, and they find some of the households can become quite isolated. In other issues, providers have said the grouping of similar types of properties together can force people with similar economical social backgrounds to live in a close proximity. A common example of this is where a high number of single bedroom units are placed together. Our waiting list showed that the highest need for both council is still for 1-bed properties, and these homes are often let to single people. A high proportion of these residents can be unemployed, and some may have addiction problems, or they can be in need of high levels of support. Providers find if they have the 1-bed units interspersed with larger units, it creates a more balanced community to live in. The providers are also very much in favour of mixed tenure clusters. They believe the residents integrate more and feel they're part of the wider community. And often we find that support can come from the neighbours. Next slide, please. So with these issues in mind, we were keen to build on our existing recommendations and create a policy that would help developers build and providers manage places where people really want to live, a place where they feel comfortable bringing up a family, and a safe and secure place for them in their older years, a truly mixed, balanced and sustainable community for all. The draft policy is split into 3 main parts. First, clustering. This part is pretty much self-explanatory. As you will see, we've asked for cluster sizes to be in proportion to the development size. Small and rural developments and the larger developments have remained as previously recommended. We have now added medium developments to the policy. Next slide, please. Next, we focus on tenure distribution. This is just as important as clustering. We don't want to encourage large numbers of individual tenures to be grouped together. It goes against our desire to build balanced communities. We ask that the developer consider carefully where tenures can be split and where it might be better to leave some tenures together. For instance, age-related schemes, supported or specialist schemes. Next slide, please. And finally, the third part of the draft policy, unit size distribution. To prevent large clusters of similar sized properties, we're asking for each cluster to contain a mixture of unit sizes. This will mitigate the issues that providers are facing with 1-bedroom units together or large rows of 3- and 4-bed homes. We shall expect the developer to design these developments carefully. We want them to also keep service charges as low as possible, of course. This keeps these homes truly affordable. Ultimately, we recommend that the developer engages with the housing team and the provider as early as possible. And we're encouraging them to provide a robust, affordable housing statement to be submitted with a planning application, clearly explaining how they're meeting our policy requirements. Some schemes will also benefit from a local lettings plan, especially larger schemes or 100% affordable schemes. These will be agreed by all parties involved and will be published in the public domain. Next slide, please. Without doubt, we do know there will be exceptions to policy. We cannot anticipate all the exceptions that may arise in the future either. There may be times we may have to consider proposals to go above the clustering thresholds on a development, or it may not be possible to distribute tenures or unit sizes as we'd normally want. However, the obligation will be on the developer to provide a robust housing statement confirming the reasons for deviating from policy and then demonstrate how the scheme will integrate with the overall community. Ultimately, we hope this policy will help the developers give the developers a sound understanding of the affordable schemes we want to see coming forward in the future, and give the providers a sustainable development to manage effectively for many years to come. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Again, people, if you've got any thoughts, any issues, if there's anything that Helen or Tracy have said that you'd like clarification over or raise an issue, please put them in the Q&A section. I haven't got anything at the moment, but perhaps people are just mulling over. In the meantime, then, I shall ask Julie Fletcher to come and talk about affordable rents. Julie.
Thank you, Julian. Hello, everybody. So I'm Julie Fletcher and I head up the Housing Strategy team at South Cambridgeshire District Council. So I've come to talk to you today about the challenges we're currently facing in terms of determining affordable rents. As you are all aware, I'm sure, affordable rents were introduced in 2011, and it was really an alternative rental model to social rent. Affordable rents enable registered providers to increase their income, which helps to offset the lack of grant funding that's available now. And to be honest, it really has become the norm in terms of the affordable housing provision. So in effect, the overall offer to a developer in terms of the affordable housing shouldn't have changed in 2011. It was more to do really with the internal financial arrangements for the RPs. Because of the huge affordability issues within the area, we will continue to seek social rents wherever possible, but we do understand the implications in terms of viability that everyone is facing. So in terms of affordable rents, they must not exceed 80% of a gross market rent, which is inclusive of any service charges. And this is set out within both planning policy and the policy statement for rent for social housing. When registered providers set their rents, they should have regard to the local market context, including the relevant local housing allowance. Unlike affordable rents, which are set based on the open market rent, social rents are calculated on a formula set by government. And generally, this will equate to around 45 to 60% of a market rent, and that's dependent on the location and the size of the property. Okay, next slide. Since 2011, across the Cambridge sub-region, I think we were all quite concerned when affordable rents were introduced about the affordability, and we have been really lucky actually working with registered providers to gain general consent that affordable rents should be set at the local housing allowance rates. This has meant that we've been able to keep affordable rents below the maximum threshold of 80% of the gross market rent. And it gave registered providers the comfort they needed really in terms that their rents would be covered by housing benefit if needed. So for Cambridge City, an affordable rent meant that rents were between 55 to 60% of a market rent and between 70 to 75% in South Cambs. Next slide. However, in March last year, local housing allowance rates were significantly increased to mitigate the impacts of those experiencing financial hardship during lockdown. Whilst at first we thought this was going to be a temporary measure and likely to go back to pre-COVID rates, it now seems that this is the new baseline for local housing allowance rates going forward. Although I understand that from this year there is a freeze on any increase. So the increase in local housing allowance was great news really, and it's something that we've been lobbying for a long time because LHA rates are so out of sync with private rents in the area. But to be fair, be careful what you wish for because the LHA rates were so significantly increased, it had unintended consequences in the way of a rent setting for the affordable rents. Okay, next slide. So here's just an example of the LHA rate increase and what this means in the terms of affordable rents if they're set on the new LHA rate. So for example, an affordable rent for a 2-bedroom property based on pre-COVID LHA rates would be around £153 per week. However, based on the new 2020 LHA rate, this would increase to around £195, which is a difference of about 27% increase or an extra £180 per month. Now, obviously, if you're claiming housing benefit, then hopefully, unless you're caught by universal credit caps, it should all be covered on the rent. But we're really concerned about the people who are just about managing and that they might get caught in the sort of benefit trap or have to go on to benefits where before they were just managing. Okay, next slide. So actually for South Cambs, if the new LHA rate was used, this would mean in some cases that it would push affordable rents above the maximum limit of 80% of a market rent. And really, regardless of that, such an increase in affordable rents across Greater Cambridge is of a huge concern in terms of affordability for those most in need. So to try and tackle this issue, we have drafted an affordable rents policy. Now, we do know that we cannot make this a requirement as local authorities have no powers to set rent levels for registered providers. But what the policy does look to do is draw upon the existing partnership approach with registered providers to provide clear guidance of our expectations, which they should have regard to. To be fair, at the end of the day, registered providers and councils alike, they want to provide homes that are affordable. And we're just really trying to set a level playing field here for everyone to work to. Because the pre-COVID LHA rates seem to work in general in terms of affordability, this policy looks to align affordable rents to that position. Therefore, we're looking to set a limit that within Cambridge City and the city fringe sites, that an affordable rent should not exceed 60% of the gross median market rent. And then for all other areas within South Cambridgeshire, that it should not exceed 70% of the gross market rent in that area. From early consultation with our own new build teams, because obviously it impacts on the councils as much as it does on registered providers, we wanted to see whether this policy position would work. And they did raise some concern actually that having to undertake a RICS qualified valuation to set the rent levels on a scheme by scheme basis would be costly and time consuming. So therefore we've sort of rethought, well, how can we still make this all align in terms of the pre-COVID rates, And we decided that as an alternative option, we can still use the January 2020 pre-COVID LHA rates as a baseline, with allowance for annual inflationary increases each year. So either of the options allow us to keep rent levels consistent with the pre-COVID rents. And we know that at that level, schemes were viable to be delivered. Next slide, please. So we have an exception to the policy in terms of allowing affordable rents to be charged at up to 80% of a median market rent, but it has to be demonstrated that the design and quality of homes is above national or local standards in relation to zero carbon homes, and that this really will result in reduced energy costs. So it's about looking at the overall home and making it truly affordable one way or another. Okay, last slide, I believe. So as you know, while you're all here today, we're currently out to consultation on all 3 draft policies mentioned. I do realise it's probably quite a lot of information to take in today in terms of what we're presenting, but hopefully it will give you some sort of food for thought in terms of your responses to the consultation. So the consultation will run for 6 weeks and it closes on the 23rd of March. It's available on both councils' websites, and we've publicised it to all our members, parish councils and various groups in the housing sector. We've also sent it out to our housing register applicants because actually at the end of the day, it's them that it will impact on most in terms of the rents that are charged. So to participate in the consultation, which I hope you all will, there is an online survey form to complete. We promised we'd hold a developer and RP forum to sort of talk through some of the policy positions that we're putting forward, because we do realise that it will have the greatest impact on you, and we wanted you to be as fully informed as possible so that you can comment. So following consultation, we're hoping to get the policies adopted through our relevant decision-making processes, and they'll have to go to 2 separate sort of cabinet members for each council, and hopefully we'll get those adopted June, July this year. It does seem a long time off, but these sort of things do take a long time in terms of collating all the consultation responses and taking it through our decision process. So that's all for me. Thank you for listening. I'll hand you back to Julian.
Thank you very much, Julie. Good stuff. As Julie said, there's a lot to take in, and maybe be thinking over some of the questions, queries, but we do have one question for you, Tracy. Can I ask if the high density flatted blocks exception she mentioned relates to the maximum number of 12 dwellings from a single stairwell, e.g. for application in areas such as North East Cambridge?
Right, yes, I mean, we are expecting North East Cambridge to have quite high density flatted blocks, and we would probably find it very difficult to enforce 12 units to a stairwell. So we are expecting many more flats to run off a stairwell, and this is why we are changing the policy. Obviously there are planning policies that we need to adhere to, but no, we wouldn't expect just 12 units off a stairwell for the larger flatted units.
Thank you, Tracy. Has anybody else got any thoughts, any queries, any context settings, anything else they'd like to know today before they might want to respond to the consultation? Or maybe contact one of us individually just to get any clarification. But if there are any more thoughts today, please pop them in the Q&A. I'll just leave a couple more moments, see if we've got anything else coming through, which we don't seem to have. We've stunned everyone into abject silence so far this morning. Okay, so if we have no more questions, I'd just like to say thank you very much for everybody who's attended this morning, and I do apologise again for the start time, and thank you to my colleagues for presenting, and have a good day. Thank you very much.